Hello again. I want to talk to you today about the most famous part of St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica. It is the part that has to do with proving the existence of God. There he lists 5 ways: away from motion, away from change, away from necessity, away from gradations of things, and finally a way based on something like final ends or design, an early version of an argument from design. And so what he does is contend that we can argue for God's existence. It's part of his general project of natural theology. Revealed theology is an attempt to understand God and the relationship between human beings and God on the basis of divine revelation, on the basis, that is, of Scripture, or of mystical experience, or some other kind of religious experience. But a natural theology starts from things that are available to anyone. That is to say, they're really based on a kind of common sense understanding of the world. There are, in his view, empirical premises. These are a posteriori arguments. They're not a priori based on just the concept of God alone, but they involve very general observations about the world, something available to anyone who lives in the world, not restricted to a particular religious group, not restricted to someone who accepts a certain scripture, or has had a certain kind of experience, or knows something about a specific and highly theoretical scientific theory. No, this is something available to anyone. So, let's start with the first of these ways. It's the way from motion. The word that he uses here in Latin means motion, but he's really translating something from Greek sources that is based on a word that means either motion or change. So we could view this as an argument from motion, an argument for a prime mover, or we could view it as an argument on the basis of change for a prime changer, a prime source of all change. In any case, here is how the first way goes. The first and more manifest way is the argument from motion. It is certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. Now, whatever is in motion is put in motion by another. At this point, we get a pause in the argument while he goes through an argument for that second premise. So first premise is that in the world some things are in motion. The second is the premise that anything that's in motion is put in motion by something else, by another being. Well, why should we think that? Here he gives a complicated argument. He says, well, nothing can be in motion except insofar as it's in potentiality to that toward which it's in motion. Whereas a thing moves inasmuch as it is in act. That is to say, it's actually doing something. Here he's relying on something from Aristotle's physics, a certain analysis of motion or change that Aristotle develops. It's an extremely interesting topic, and Aquinas has his own interpretation, which comes out in his commentary on Aristotle's physics. But let's not, for our purposes, go into the details of that, because, as I'm going to argue, actually, I don't think the support for this premise particularly matters. In any case, he says motion is just reducing potentiality to actuality, and nothing can do that except something else that's in a state of actuality. For example, something actually hot, such as fire, makes wood, which is potentially hot, to become actually hot, and thereby moves and changes it. Now, it's not possible that the same thing should be at once in actuality and in potentiality in the same respect, but only in different respects. I am actually sitting, I am potentially standing, but you can't really say I'm potentially sitting, I'm already doing it. And so when he talks about something being in potency or in potentiality, he means possibly but not actually being in that state. For what's actually hot can't be potentially hot at the same time, it's simultaneously potentially cold. So it's therefore impossible that in the same respect and in the same way, a thing should be both mover and moved, that it should move itself. So that's the key point here. Really, nothing can move itself. So anything that moves has to be moved by something else. If that by which it's put in motion be itself put in motion, then this also needs to be put in motion by another, and that by another again. But this can't go on to infinity, because then there would be no first mover and consequently no other mover, seeing that subsequent movers move only inasmuch as they're put in motion by the first mover, as the staff moves only because it's put in motion by the hand. Therefore, it's necessary to arrive at a first mover put in motion by no other, and this everyone understands to be God. Well, let's go through the steps of this argument a little more carefully, and I'm going to leave out that sub-argument about actuality and potentiality. Again, in the end, we get a second version that's very similar to this argument, the second way, but it has a very different sub-argument for this crucial premise that plays the same role. And in any event, I'll argue in the end, we don't need any of this. So let's ignore that for the moment. Here's the basic structure of the argument. First premise, things in this world, in hoc mundo is his Latin, change or are in motion. Secondly, things that are in motion are put in motion by something else. This entails a regress of motion. As long as we're within at least the domain of this world, well, this thing that's in motion must have been moved by something else. It had to be moved by something else. It had to be moved by something else, and so on. Now that regress, he says, cannot be infinite. What moved this? That. What moved that? That. What moved that? It can't go on forever. In other words, if we say, why is this in motion? Eventually that explanation has to come to an end. It can't go back infinitely. Therefore, he says, there must be a first mover, one moved by nothing else. That first mover is God. Well, there are a lot of things you can say about this first argument, but before we get to the details of this, I want to go on to the second way, because they really do have the same structure, and we might as well deal with them together. There are many objections that can be and have been raised, but any objection you raise to this argument that doesn't depend on the sub-argument for that second premise really is going to be an argument against the second way as well. So let's talk about it and see that it has a common structure. Here is the second way, based on efficient causation. The second way is from the nature of efficient cause. In the world of sense, we find there is an order of efficient causes. There is no case known, neither is it possible, in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself, for then it would have to be prior to itself, and that's impossible. So there's the little sub-argument for that idea that anything that causes something else must, well, be caused by something else. It can't cause itself. Now, in efficient causes, it's not possible to go on to infinity, because in all efficient causes following in order, the first is the cause of the intermediate, and the intermediate the cause of the ultimate cause, whether the intermediate is one or several. Now, to take away the cause is to take away the effect. Therefore, if there be no first cause among efficient causes, there will be no ultimate nor any intermediate cause. But if in efficient causes it is possible to go on to infinity, there will be no first efficient cause. Neither will be there an ultimate effect, nor any intermediate effects or causes, all of which is plainly false. Therefore, it's necessary to admit a first efficient cause, to which everyone gives the name of God. Well, let's take a look at the basic structure of that argument. And again, let's leave out that sub-argument that nothing can cause itself because causes are always prior to their effects, and nothing can be prior to itself. Here's the basic structure. We see effects in the world of sense. Secondly, effects are caused by something else. That entails a regress of causation. We've got effect, cause. Well, cause of the cause, cause of the cause of the cause, cause of the cause of the cause of the cause, and so on. But that regress can't go on to infinity. So there's got to be a first cause. It's got to stop somewhere. That first cause is God. Well, plainly, these arguments do have a common structure. So let's take a look at what that structure is. I'm going to suggest in a later video a way of making this even simpler. But here's a way we might put the basic structure as he presents it. First of all, we can assume that there's a kind of non-emptiness condition. In the world of sense, for example, there are effects, or there are things moving. Let's just talk about causes and effects, since movers and moved feels like an instance, pretty much, of cause and effect. In any case, we could say then, first premise, non-emptiness. There is, or there are, effects in the world of sense. Second premise, you could call this a premise of seriality. It is something that is a basic logical principle about relations. In the world of sense, everything has a cause. But then, a principle of irreflexivity. Nothing causes itself. Now, I think we have to assume in the background something like a principle of transitivity. I'm going to suggest later we can clean this up a little bit, make it a little nicer. But the basic idea is the relation we're talking about had better be a transitive relation. That is to say, if x causes y and y causes z, we're going to act as if x is a cause of z. You'll see why in a moment. That will turn out to be important to getting the validity of his argument. Then, a principle of finiteness. We can say causal chains can't be backwards infinite. They can't go back infinitely in time to cause of cause, cause of cause of cause, etc. They must at some point stop. So now we could say there must be a first cause, and that's the way he leaves it. But actually we can do a little bit better than that. I think it's important that in these arguments he says things like in hoc mundo, in this world, or in the world of sense. Actually what we get is a first mover, a first cause outside that world of sense. There has got to be some place where this chain stops. And that chain can't be in the world of sense. It can't be in this world. Why? Because then it would have to have a cause. So we've got to go back. We had a principle that said, look, everything in the world of sense is caused by something else. Well, if that first cause were in the world of sense, it would have a cause. But the whole point is that it's the starting point for this chain of causation, so it can't be in the world of sense. It can't be in this world. Consequently, we conclude there has to be a first cause. Moreover, it's outside this world. It's outside the world of sense. If we think of that domain as the natural world, then what we've done is show that there is a supernatural first cause. Well, that argument is a pretty powerful argument. Still, many people have raised objections to it. Premises 1, 3, and 4 look pretty solid, or at least we can stipulate that we're using the term cause in a way that implies transitivity. So, the real question is about premises 2, 5, and, well, then of course our conclusion 7. So first of all, let's take a look at that seriality premise. Does everything in the world of sense, everything in this world, have a cause? What if there are some random events that don't have any causes at all? How bad is that for the argument? The second problem has to do with that finiteness premise. Why can't we assume that the chain of causes or movers goes back to infinity? Why do we have to assume that there is only a finite chain? I think it is hard to imagine something going back to infinity. On the other hand, it feels a bit like what happens when you've got a 2-year-old. Why is the sky blue? Well, it's because light breaks down into different colors. It's made up of things of different wavelengths. And the way the atmosphere is curved, it reflects the blue light toward us. Why? Well, it has to do with the laws of light and refraction. Why? Well, at some point, you eventually start saying, oh, shut up, kid. You stop answering. But you start getting the sense, oh my, what if these questions could go on forever? Well, Aquinas' point is, look, they can't go on forever. At some point, you've got to say, no, no, no. There had to be a starting point. Now, one of, I think, the things that's driving him is this thought that causes are prior to their effects. We'd have to imagine things going back infinitely in time. So instead of saying, well, this is the year 2020 or stardate, whatever it might be, we'd have to say, well, really, since the beginning of the universe, infinitely much time has passed for us to get here. But his question is, that doesn't seem to make sense. Cosmologists, for example, talk about the age of the universe. They speculate that maybe it's 13.7 million years old, or billion years old, or whatever it is, right? They come up with some number. But what if somebody said, well, it's just infinitely old. It's just always been here. To go back to the earliest time, there was still a universe before that. No cosmologist says that. It seems theoretically possible, but somehow really difficult for us to imagine. Now, admittedly, that's not much of an argument, but you can see exactly why Aquinas says, look, it couldn't go back infinitely. That doesn't really make sense. Now, Al-Ghazali, an Arabic philosopher, had said earlier, I don't think we can really rest content with this argument about finiteness as it stands. Why? He says, well, how could we have an argument for it? The argument would have to be a priori, based on concepts, or it would have to be a posteriori, based on experience of the world. We have no experience that would be relevant to the question of whether the universe has a finite or an infinite age. We can't really have an a posteriori argument. But on the other hand, could we have an a priori argument? Where's the contradiction in the idea that time and causation go back infinitely? The structure of the negative numbers, of the integers, seems to suggest, yeah, we can imagine some structure that goes back to infinity. So, he argues, there can't really be an argument of either kind. Nevertheless, however that may be, we might say, look, there's another problem. And it's a problem that's going to haunt us throughout all of Aquinas' 5 ways. What justifies the uniqueness language in the conclusion? We said, so there must be a first cause. Or there must be a supernatural first cause. But why should there be just one? He says everyone calls that God. But hold on a second. What if there are many causes outside the universe? We get the existence out of this argument of at least one supernatural first cause, at least one prime mover. But how do we get from at least one prime mover to exactly one prime mover? How do we get to a first cause, at least one first cause, to the first cause? Well, we don't find out. There's nothing in this argument that really tells us. And that will be a problem throughout all of these arguments. It's not something I think Aquinas just drops and leaves undiscussed. There are going to be things that will try to solve that problem, but they're complicated, and I don't want to go into them now. So, one way to look at this is to say, suppose he's right about the uniqueness problem. Suppose it's true there's one first cause. Still, there's a further step. Why should we call that God? Well, that's a good question. Why haven't we proved the existence of a Big Bang type event, for example? A beginning to the universe, a first cause. Something that just happens and has no cause itself. Well, he says, look, and here's, I think, why it's important to keep that condition in this world, in the world of sense, in mind. We want the conclusion that this is a supernatural first cause. It's not something that happens within this world as a first event in the world like the Big Bang. No, it's something outside of this world, outside the world of sense, truly supernatural, that causes this world. Still, you might say, the classical concept of God is of a being that is entirely good, all-powerful, all-knowing, conscious. And so far, we have no reason to think this being is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good. It could be, look, it started a universe, it better be pretty powerful. But all-powerful? Well, we don't have that yet. Now, so far we've looked at just the first 2 of Aquinas' ways. There are others, and moreover, the section that follows this is called the simplicity of God. And he's going to argue there that all of the properties of God are tied together. So in the end, his position is that once we have one of them, that God is the first cause, for example, in effect the creator, then we can get from that to all of the other concepts. Because in the end, in God, they're all the same. But that's a complicated argument, so we'll wait for a later video to consider that.